Hello to another conversation coming to you from the Centre for International Security and Governance here at Bonn University. I'm Zulfikar Abbany, and today we've got Dr. Enrico Fels, Research Fellow at the Centre for Global Studies at the University of Bonn as well. Enrico, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great stuff. Now we're going to focus on Asia, perhaps for obvious reasons, but first of all we want to stick a little bit more to home. So Enrico, perhaps we are going to get into President Trump's visit to Asia just in a second. But first of all, given the failed coalition talks, or what appear to be at this point failed coalition talks, is there any significance from that in the Asian region? Does anybody care about it?
Just a little bit. I mean, the big fear is that we will have a government that is basically a lame duck, that will not be active for new approaches towards greater European integration for the next month. And this is, of course, a problem because Europe is facing a multitude of crises. So the fear in Asia is that internal problems in Germany will result in less German leadership within Europe.
Okay, so what areas is that really important for Asian countries that they need Germany? Why is it that significant, apart from a failed sort of state?
Well, Germany is one of the few countries in Europe that is currently stable, or that has been stable over the last decade, thanks to Angela Merkel's government. And of course, with that stability comes economic progress. And Asian countries depend on external demand, so less demand from Europe means less export to Europe from Asian countries. So there's an economic angle to that.
Okay. So that's the German situation. What about the United States? President Donald Trump was recently in Asia, took in a number of countries, was at the ASEAN meeting. What's the takeaway message there for you? Sort of a 30,000 feet approach for starters.
Well, that's difficult, a 30,000 feet approach. Two issues were important. The first one was, of course, North Korea, which I think we will go to next. And the second one was trade. As you know, Trump is very much concerned about supposed imbalances and unfair trading practices. So he put off this topic all the time, and this was one of the lead topics in during his visit, and he asked for an Indo-Pacific dream that basically leads to more fair, more balanced trade relationships between the United States and regional countries.
And how receptive were the countries, the regional countries?
Well, we'll have to see. After the Trump administration put off TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to the big disappointment of regional countries, which are now in the negotiation process with China over the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, we have to see whether the Trump administration is actually succeeding in winning the support of regional governments for bilateral trade relationships, because all of these countries want to have multilateral trade agreements. We have seen a number of trade deals agreed upon. Most of these are memorandum of understanding, and it seems to be that particularly in Tokyo, but also in Seoul, the leadership is more perceptive to the idea that trade relationships have to be rebalanced a little bit. I don't see this from Beijing, to be honest.
Okay, well, you mentioned Seoul there, and one of the interesting things is this sort of on-again, off-again approach of the US administration to South Korea and a trade deal there. What's the message there? I mean, what can we understand in that?
For Seoul, economics is not as important as security. So what they are concerned about is the northern neighbor. And if Trump, and I think he has succeeded in that, is able to interlink both issues, and he also succeeded with regards to Japan, to the Japanese government on this, I think they will be more perceptive in renegotiating trade deals. For the last 5 years, there has been a free trade agreement between both countries, and Donald Trump has repeatedly dismissed this agreement, has called it a very bad deal, something that is losing jobs, and of course has blamed Hillary Clinton personally for these results. I don't think that this is actually true, because for me it's more about the domestic situation in the United States, so I wouldn't blame it on the South Korean government or the South Korean economy. But he will put more effort into renegotiating things, because he has to present something to the demos, the people that are responsible for putting him into the office.
Sure, but a lot of this confusion over South Korea came up with the recent tensions over North Korea. So the security issue, and as you said, he mixes very well, trade and security. Does he know what the end game is there for him?
Well, economic-wise, I think he does now. He wants to increase the economic output within the United States. He wants to regain jobs from other countries. So he has to get rid of the huge trade imbalances. If you look at the trade deficits they have with with China, it's more than 350 billion. With Japan, it's around 65 billion. So there's a problem, of course, and this is costing jobs within the United States. But having said that, the big issue here is North Korea. The North Korean government is putting a lot of pressure on the South Korean government, and I'm not sure whether he knows where the end game is there. I don't think that he has a game out of this situation.
And you mentioned Beijing, you mentioned China before on the trade issue. How can their relationship with North Korea play into this increasingly complex situation?
The situation on the Korean Peninsula is closely interconnected with the strategic rivalry between the United States and Beijing. Beijing is not happy about the situation of Korea. They don't want to have a nuclearized Korean peninsula because they can see what Henry Kissinger recently emphasized, that there's a trend towards nuclear proliferation going on. Because if North Korea is allowed to keep nuclear weapons, of course, who is to blame South Korea or Japan for getting nuclear weapons themselves, which means that the treaty that prohibits countries to actually have nuclear weapons is basically out of order. So we have to, and at the same time, Beijing does not want to have United States troops close to its own border with Korea. So a forced, let's say, reunification is not interesting to them. At the same time, they don't want to have an military escalation on the peninsula because this might prevent their supposedly peaceful rise. So that's why Beijing is carefully fostering North Korea and is trying to keep the regime alive, but at the same time they're trying to put on incentives to force them to get rid of nuclear weapons.
But is that realistic, a military escalation of the tensions?
Well, there's always the risk of strategic escalation. The problem with Asia Pacific is that there's no security community. There's no understanding that political problems will be only solved by diplomatic or economic means and not by military means. This is a huge difference to Europe. We learned our lessons, and that's why we are very much in support of a European unification project. It is different with Asia Pacific, where we are still having what some scholars are calling the Thucydides trip, which means that over the last 500 years, we had 16 instances where a rising great power met an established one. And in 12 out of these 16 instances, we had a great power war going on. I don't think that is going to take place, but Graham Allison, who is responsible for research on this issue, is cautioning us because fighting great powers always mean that the mices, the middle powers, the small powers, might suffer in the end.
If I can take a small detour, I mean, you have some connection academically to Australia, and Australia has a long tradition of sort of wanting to be engaged in Asia, but then also not be engaged in Asian countries. Can Australia do anything to give some kind of a balance and perhaps aid what the US may be trying to achieve?
I think Australia can, and Australia can because Australia is a middle power that is very much interested in a regulated regional order that is not based on power politics. So they are emphasizing economic regional cooperation while at the same time try to calm down those hawks that are pushing for a more assertive posture on both sides, both in the United States and in the People's Republic of China. So I see middle powers, just like Australia, interested in getting a regional grouping that is putting diplomatic pressure on both the giants to behave in more calm manners.
Okay, so you mentioned also China, and we've focused a little bit on actually quite a lot on North Korea, but China has its own disputes with Japan in the South China Sea. How is that going to play out, and what was the US's response there? Does it want to get involved? Does it want to leave its fingers off that?
Well, the US is already engaged. I mean, when you talk about maritime disputes, there are two big areas. One is the East China Sea with the Senkaku-Ryukyu Islands between Japan and China, and the other one is the South China Sea complex, where some fear that this might develop into a Chinese lake, that China is basically demanding an own Monroe Doctrine. And the big problem, particularly when it comes to the South China Sea, is that China is very much interested in having a security buffer that is protecting its coastal areas, that is protecting the island of Hainan, which is important for its submarine bases over there, its spaceport, a very important spaceport, and of course China's in the process of developing a nuclear triad, which means that it wants to have an assured second strike capability, and for this submarines are very much important. Of course, there's also the interlinkage between historic narratives, which are often fabricated, not only on the Chinese side, but also on the Vietnamese and Philippine side, and the national interests, the larger national interests. So I don't see any let's say timely chance of a peaceful solution to this, but I believe that all sides are interested in keeping trading going, because trade is big. Asia, South China Sea is the most important maritime area when it comes to trade.
That's the glue that keeps everything together.
Absolutely, right? So far. So scholars that are pushing the interdependence theory are actually right. The only problem from a European perspective, and that's why we Europeans have to get more engaged in the region, is that according to our history, we saw that when there's no security community, even close trade relationships cannot prohibit great power war. We have to remember that in 1910, the economic relationships within Europe were so strong that scholars argued that it is irrational for European great powers to engage in war. And of course, we know a few years later on we had this war, and the level of economic interlinkage was as high as we only had after, 1950, 1996, something like that. So it was very intense.
So let's have a look at Europe as we sort of begin to wrap this up a little bit. What is Europe's role here, with or without a strong, stable Germany? Is it going to be on the back foot, say, when the US does create more bilateral relationships, trade relationships? What can Europe do?
I think we are seeing a closer trend towards tripolarity, which means that Europe is developing itself in a stronger international actor. But for this to be a successful venture, Europe has to get its act together. This means we have to have a closer cooperation when it comes to defense, but also we have to rethink how we organize economic, let's say, supranationalization in Europe. I don't think that the euro itself, the euro currency, has been such a good thing, so we have to amend a few things in order to make it work also for the countries that are less productive. And basically we have to stop putting up more internal crises and become stronger unity in order to be a capable outside actor.
Okay, so does it bear mentioning Brexit at this time? I mean, is this one of those issues that is again being ignored in all the conversation, whether it's within the UK or between the UK and Brussels? These sort of further afield?
Well, Brexit is a big blow for the European unification, that is clear. I think it also is a warning for us that we have to think about the way how we structure Europe, the way how we connect the wishes of the people with the ideas that we have in academia and political circles. So there has to be a closer connection between the two groups, and also in order to avoid populist parties to gain more support, which they will if we fail to deliver. And we have to deliver particularly economically, because also in democratic countries we have an output legitimacy that is needed in order to support political stability. So the big thing is, I don't believe that Brexit will have a severe impact on the European security architecture, because the British will be part of NATO. But on the other hand, if the European Union shall become a capable security actor, we need capacities. And this is what particularly Germany is lacking. So we have to have a closer integration. Maybe the past resistance of the British, which is now gone, is thus helping us to have a closer interlocking within European military architecture. But we have to provide the resources to provide a base for acting on international affairs.
And are you optimistic about that?
Not really, not so far.
Why not?
Because the multiple crises, these crises cost money. And this is a migrant crisis, the debt crisis, sovereign debt crisis, the currency crisis. And of course we have the engagement with Russia. And of course we have two security architectures that are a little bit of competing with each other. We've got the NATO, the transatlantic network, and the inter-European network on the other hand. And I don't know yet how this will play out. I hope for the best, but let's see.
Okay, well, sort of a sort of positive, sort of negative note to end on there.
Realists are not negative. We are pessimists when it comes. But of course, we always are. We are happy when we are proven wrong.
Oh, very good, very good. Dr. Enrico Fels, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That was another conversation from the Centre for International Security and Governance with Dr. Enrico Fels, a research fellow at the Centre for Global Studies at the University of Bonn. Thank you very much. Till next time.